Can you hear me okay? Yeah, brilliant, thank you. Right, so hope you had a great lunch, an enjoyable lunch. We are now on the third session of the day. We'll be talking about the barriers and enablers to a sustainable estate. When we were formulating the sort of theme of this session, what should we talk about, we ended up going down the rabbit hole of technology again, and I think we really wanted to avoid a technology discussion and a technical discussion about what technology is going to help us decarbonise or deliver a sustainable estate. What we were really, really keen on doing is talking about some of those mechanisms, some of those things we see in our projects that we see as challenges but also opportunities. Arcadis were very fortunate enough to be involved in the located project, and I'll talk a bit about that. And I'm joined by, sorry, excuse me. Apologies. I'm joined by a great panel, so we've got Bev Quinn, who was on the keynote speech earlier today from the DFE. Mott's joined us. They'll be looking at this from a project management perspective, and Alex Macon, an MEP engineer. We'll then have a short panel discussion, and then we'll try and open up to the floor to see if there's any questions. So as I said, Arcadis were fortunate enough to be involved in the Net Zero Phase 1 Accelerator, and actually our findings from that and the challenges that were associated with nothing to do with technology. We know the technology's proven, it's validated. This whole idea of doing more pilots, if I may say, Bev, sorry, is, I'm not sure, the best use of our time and money. I think we need to start looking at some of the other challenges that genuinely prohibit us from moving this forward. So, like I said, technology's proven, I don't think we need to validate it. The construction outlook and inflation, I think we've all recognised the construction challenges across the past few years. They have proven to be a bit of a barrier in terms of, well, we have secured funding to be able to deliver that funding and deliver those projects has been quite challenging. The other thing we found was it's all linked, and what I mean by that is we can't look at conditions and sustainability independently. They come as a package, and I think the risk of looking at sustainability is we'll end up with duplicating efforts and costs and resources to be able to deliver a safe, sustainable education estate. The next is skills and resources, and I talk about this a lot because I do believe it's a significant future challenge, and actually at Arcadis we're doing a lot of work around looking at alliancing for other sectors, MMC, design for manufacturing and assembly. And the reason why we're doing that is we know that the skill shortage is going to have an impact on our ability to deliver. So the analogy we've used a few times today is even if we secured $4 billion from Treasury tomorrow at the next government, what's going to prohibit us from actually delivering that? It's probably skills, it's probably a procurement route, it's probably programs, it's pipeline. That's the bits I think we need to be focusing on. We've talked about funding. I'm not going to dwell on that because we all know funding is one of the key barriers. We look forward to seeing what the DFE can achieve through the negotiations with Treasury in the coming months. And then it's more than just carbon. I think there's a new term I've started using, carbon tunnel syndrome, where we're so focused on carbon we forget the other benefits that this can achieve. Things like green skills, which we've talked about today, to be fair, improving health and life chances. And I've said this quite a lot over my time in working in education, which is, what is an education building? It's there to deliver education. If that building doesn't deliver education and can't keep children safe, no matter how zero carbon it is, it's not fulfilling its purpose. I don't think we can lose sight of that when we're decarbonising our buildings. So I'm going to pass over to Bev. Our presenters will do a short presentation and then we'll move on to questions.
Thanks, Herschel. I'm going to keep this quite short. So you've heard from a couple of DFE colleagues today. So we're just going to talk a little bit about the long-term sustainable estates, and just to challenge you, Herschel, on your comment about the pilots and pathfinders within our strategy that we've published, and I've just got the strategic aims up just to remind everyone. We have committed to evidence gathering and testing and piloting until 2025, and then bringing all of that together, and then trying to deliver what we've set out within the strategy. So they aren't just technology focused, because you're right, we know quite a lot by this point about what works, what doesn't work, that you know, it's more like bringing it together and taking this more holistic approach, but also not just going down that sort of net zero rabbit hole that we always seem to get caught up in. And it's, you know, there's probably lots of reasons for that. It's, you know, a lot of us, that's where our background is from. So, you know, we're so used to talking about it, and we know how to solve all of those challenges technically. It is more this wider solution that we're missing. And that's why within the strategic aims, net zero is just one of them. So it is great that this session is, you know, the barriers and enablers to a long-term sustainable estate. And, you know, there are lots of the barriers, and we have all these projects trying to feed into this bigger picture. But one of the challenges is that the DFA, we don't actually own the estate. So, you know, we don't have that direct control that I think everybody thinks that we do. So that's an issue in itself. But with lots of ways to move forward. And I'm not going to dwell on this for too long, but again, as Herschel was saying, it's not just net zero. The key focus areas are climate education, green skills, estate and infrastructure. You know, it's embedded within that, and there is a lot that collectively we can do. And it was really nice throughout the day to actually hear from some of the other organisations who have done really great work in this space. There, you know, there is a lot of guidance and support available for schools. And one of our projects, it is trying to bring what's out there already for schools to help them on this sustainability journey, and yeah, not just focus on net zero. So there's lots happening. I'm not going to take up too much time presenting. I'll pass over to Becca, and we'll be back for more follow-up questions. Thank you.
Great. So yeah, just for a bit of point of view from a PM and a bit of the overview of a handover timeline. So often these new net zero buildings feel like a bit of a spaceship to their end user, and it's quite difficult going from a very differently maintained school to a new one. And to ensure this very smooth transition, I think it's important to get collaboration between all the different stakeholders involved, whether that be the DFE, the technical advisor, the school facility management team, and also the contractors soft landing team particularly. So it's important that the DFE and the TA are helping the school facilities management team to know what training is going to be provided during handover. Are they aware of the time commitments involved? What are they going to get out of it? And actually making sure that the right people are in the room during that training. And it's not just done as a bit of a tick box exercise to get handover complete and hit a certain date, but actually it's done in an effective way that's transferring the information to the people that need it. I think it's also important to note that the 12 months defects is not just a thing that needs to happen and the contractor comes in at certain months and they kind of are there for a day and then disappear. But this is actually where we're testing the building, seeing whether it's actually achieving what the performance targets were set during the design phase. Are they actually being met during commissioning and actually in use? And particularly on projects where there might be derogations away from the net zero because it's a refurbishment project, for example, have there actually been performance targets set for that building? Are they actually being achieved in use? And are the contractor actually working with the school facility management team to tweak the MEP systems and actually update the O&Ms and keep that lessons learned there? And yeah, what happens at the end of 12 months? Are the school ready to take on the new building into the rest of its life, or are they not? So just kind of a slide about educational staff. It's also important, educational staff and the pupils and everyone using this building. I think it's so important that particularly the staff who are coming into a new classroom at the start of September potentially, do they know how it functions? Do they know how to control the ventilation when it's really stuffy? Are they opening the windows? Are they not? How do they use the building? And do they understand why it's being operated in a certain way? I think it's really important that the energy data and every data about the building is actually put on show for the school and for the pupils to know about. Maybe it could be dashboards around the school, but also it could be embedded into the curriculum how do we actually get the pupils learning about their new school, putting it into the curriculum, knowing how they can improve the building and why this new building is so much better than the old, for example. And then, yeah, a little bit about kind of this sustainable estate strategy, the SS6 document, which the TAs produce. Is that actually being developed along with in line with the Trust's long-term sustainable estates? Do they have that vision? Do they know what good examples are? Are there being standards set by potentially the DFE or other good examples that could be shared around and have a bit of lessons learned? But yeah, I think it's important that ultimately the pupils are learning because they are our future leaders in the industry as well. So yeah, I'll hand on.
Thanks, Becca. This slide is actually, I'm not going to go through every line item, it's just to identify some of those barriers, and then I've got the unfortunate thing of clicking through all of them, but I won't spend 2 ages doing that. But I think these are more agenda items, but just picking up on a few, we've talked about some of them in earlier sessions: financial issues, access to funding, procurement, resistance to change, some of those things. But I think the one I wanted to focus on in this 5 minutes, and we'll come back to some of these again in a moment, is that ownership, and it's that knowledge sharing, and it's that peer-to-peer experience. That's not just, Becca focused there a lot on the new builds, and obviously that's a lot of what we do in the work in terms of the project management and the technical advisor role, and it's quite a privileged position. A lot of the retrofit works that we subsequently do don't have that hand-holding, don't have that engagement, and actually a lot of it then falls on the schools to understand, in some of these retrofits they can be quite fundamental shifts in maintenance, and it's making sure the principles from the new build elements are also applied to retrofit, measurement and verification principles, suitable O&Ms, suitable training from the initiation of design through to delivery and in operation, and actually using those months subsequently appropriately. And I guess we'll run through some of these items, but I just want to stress that sort of ownership and the knowledge sharing. There's a few organisations in today, the Net Zero Hubs, etc., which are perhaps in a privileged position to facilitate that peer-to-peer networking that we probably don't see enough of. We get information as PMs and as TAs, we probably don't share it widely enough with our colleagues or our peers, etc. And to an extent with DFE, again, it's that ownership piece. It's how do we collate those knowledge and that lessons learned. The schools particularly are the ones that are having the challenges. How do they feed back? Where do they capture it? Where do we learn from that and keep that route going? And there are some good examples, and we picked up on the POE, but I think that was the one thing I just wanted to get was how do we facilitate, I haven't got an answer straight away, but how do we facilitate that knowledge sharing and get over that barrier?
Great, thank you.
Thank you very much. First off, thank you for the opportunity to speak today. I'm here because I've always been passionate about public sector work, energy efficiency and practical design. And today I'm going to share some of AECOM's experiences with the barriers and challenges of grant funding, but also how to make them successful. There's 2 main schemes available from central government that many of you are likely to be familiar with: the Low Carbon Skills Fund and the Public Sector Decarbonisation Scheme. The first provides grant funding for heat decarbonisation plans, while the second provides construction funding to put these plans into action. At AECOM, we have a wealth of experience with both schemes, including, I'm proud to say, working alongside the Department for Sustainability and Net Zero on reviewing these applications and fine-tuning the process. So on to some of the challenges. These include project programme. It's always difficult to navigate in both application stage and construction. Applications that are rushed often fail to take a holistic approach. Early engagement and long-term planning make, unsurprisingly, for the best proposals. And in construction, reduction of programmes to avoid term time or replacement of heating systems within summer periods can be a significant barrier to a consultant's ability to resolve challenges when, not if, they arise. Applications that do not include for accurate cost assessments or costs that are not aligned accordingly against required grant criteria are most often at risk. Therefore, appointment of consultants that have a firm grasp of costs should never be disregarded. As an example, Salix allows us to exclude the costs associated with HV upgrades within their application. However, this is often needed to support the electrification of heat, and the omission of these costs will be at the detriment to the scheme long term. So make the scope clear against the criteria. Inability to demonstrate heating system efficiency improvements, total carbon elimination, and aligning these works with system life expectancies is too often and surprisingly overlooked. For example, many educational estates have been constructed over a wide time span, often containing a multitude of building types, heating sources and service methodologies. So make clear in your application, is it for a group of buildings supplied by one heat source or a single building with multiple heat sources? So what makes for a successful SALEC scheme? Well, alignment to the building management plan. It's a simple yet often misunderstood point. For example, if you're going to incorporate PV or roof insulation for that matter, ensure this aligns with the life expectancy and replacement plan of the roof itself. Make sure that any proposed fabric interventions, such as window replacement, coincide with the improvement to external wall insulation. This will help facilitate well thought out architectural detailing and the reduction of costs. As a simple example, you should try to avoid putting up scaffolding twice. Having a long-term strategy and understanding the nuances of your site before you engage in any project will provide the most benefit. The most successful schemes often make use of the Low Carbon Skills Fund to produce accurate research, defining the most sensible solutions, creating an in-depth, coordinated and well thought out decarbonisation plan that aligns with the building maintenance and replacement regime. So make your buildings work smarter and harder. Space utilisation. In the context of curriculums, are all the areas used all the time? If not, how can these be rationalised? We often survey schools with a vast array of areas that appear to be vacant for one reason or another. So look at your building culture. How do people use your existing spaces? And how can you collect data to improve that usage? And while any research is important, embedding any cultural change that you get from this research is fundamental to your long-term success. Rethink your budgets. Moving allocation from new builds and extensions to improving existing areas and infrastructure will not only help reduce your ongoing energy costs and operational carbon, but help enable your future decarbonisation plans when you come to put them in place. If you're able to spend existing budgets on improving and maintaining existing infrastructure, you'll have better opportunity to apply for funding when grants become available. And as a final thought, all of this needs to be considered in the context of all the other significant pressures that educational institutions are under. RAC, teaching budgets, safeguarding, the recruitment and retention of staff, legacy building services, asbestos, the list of challenges can seem endless. And we all, from end users, operators, down to consultants, need to be conscious of how one improvement can facilitate another. In simple terms, using less energy can increase budgets for other departments and uses in future. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. So we'll move on to the questions now. Alex, the first question is to you around some of the challenges that you have engaging schools in your projects at project level. We know that the school estate is very varied. We go from single academy trusts all the way to large multi-academy trusts. We've also got maintained schools and free schools. What sort of challenges do you see in engaging those schools in these sorts of projects, and how do you bring them on board as part of your sort of developing their decarbonisation journeys?
So, I've touched on some of the issues that are not just associated with the applications of SALECs, right, but also in the construction and development of any scheme. And one thing I wanted to touch on was multiple user groups and actually decision making. Is that we often find that schools, if they suddenly get some grant funding or some funding from central government that want to press ahead with a scheme, and they have drop dead dates because they need to get students back into education and use these spaces, and sometimes they fail to take a breath and talk to their user groups, and there are multiple, from IT to teachers to facility managers, and the best schemes that we generally engage with have project managers that have thought about that and engaged with that process before we start.
Great, thank you. And Mott, Becca and Andrew, from your perspective as a sort of project management leads and projects, what do you see as some of those challenges when you're setting up projects?
I think it obviously varies from, we touched on some of the new build work as well, where it's obviously much more structured, there's an awful lot, but from the retrofit side, I think a huge part of Alex picked up, part of it is the user groups, it's the understanding, but it's also aligning the in-use, the operational challenges we've got there. That a lot of the good schemes that we've talked about there in terms of design are not then necessarily always fulfilled in practice and in operation, because we haven't set up we haven't engaged the right users as to how they're going to facilitate it, who's going to operate them, particularly the janitorial staff and the likes. And if there is an opportunity for potentially increased maintenance costs or what have you to facilitate best optimisation of the asset thereafter, there is additional running costs potentially, but they will actually come for the betterment of the whole life saving. So it's really just picking on what Alex saying, getting the right people together, but not just from a design perspective. It is actually the sort of the delivery stage as well, which is really important.
Yeah, great, thank you. And that's very much at a project level, but at a programme level as a large, national organisation, global organisation. What do you want to see from the likes of the DFE to sort of support you and better to enable you to better support your clients?
Yes, I think knowledge sharing, I picked that up on this earlier, is success stories and all these other things. Having central repositories for where outcomes have been realised, where issues have been realised, where what is best practice. There are some good areas for it, and there's some good facilitation of that knowledge sharing, but there isn't somewhere that I could point to immediately now and say, okay, you've got this issue, who do we go to? DFE have some good stuff and facilitate some good engagement, but it doesn't capture it. Salix obviously do some great work with PSDS. It's probably still a bit early in terms of then sharing those best practices, but that's going to be fundamental for the next couple of years, is learning the M&V outcomes of things like PSDS and the likes, that we're actually taking those lessons learned and not making the same mistakes. That's fundamentally something that possibly will happen in the last few years, where we have tried to mobilise quickly. Heat pumps being an obvious example. I think that there will be a number of challenging stories that come out of it, and we should go after those and learn the lessons from those, not just the success factors and sort of hailing, isn't it great we've put this money in and we've got these outcomes. Where have the challenges been? Because we've got so much more still to do. Let's not repeat those issues.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Bev, a question for you around data, and I'm sorry, I know there's a data session afterwards, but hopefully it won't either contradict or take too much away from it. But the DFE is clearly one of the most intelligent central government clients out there. You have an immense amount of data through, the new build programmes, CDC, etc. How can you use that data to better make decisions? I mean, just to give you an example, we were talking today about PSDS funding. With all of that data, you could probably create a allocation-based solution rather than a grant bid-based solution. So you could save a lot of heartache for a lot of people. What's the sort of DFE's position on using that data?
Yeah, so I mean, just on data generally, everybody wants to gather data, different data. There's data sets here, there, and everywhere. And sometimes one of the problems with gathering all of this data is that before people start doing it, they don't really have a clear understanding of what do they actually want to do with the data. What's the point in it? Sometimes data is collected not by me personally, but it might just sit and gather dust.
Sure.
So that's not ideal. So I just think with any sort of data gathering we do between us, within the DFE externally, need to be clear what the value of it is and what those outcomes are that we actually want to achieve from that data. So you're right, we have a lot of data, we gather a lot of different data. So from the live, DFE funded capital programmes, we're constantly gathering different pieces of data and lessons learned to try and then inform the future standards. But then when we're, maybe talking in much larger scale, like condition data, which we do gather as well, the value for that, the DFE, is very different from the way that trusts and individual schools are using data, because they might want really specific data about their school to make really specific interventions, and to have those interventions planned out and their investment planned out if they're in a state, across the whole estate. But at sort of DFE level, in terms of condition data, is a little bit different because it is at a much higher level. So, we would be looking to understand what that scale of investment is across the whole estate, and then be able to sort of map that out and plan that out based on the need. And sort of, as I'd mentioned at the beginning, that the department don't own the estate. So again, it's for that sort of future thinking, forward planning. And as it was sort of touched on the funding session about the bids that we put into Treasury to actually get the funding. So it's really important, but we do have to be careful about how much time, I suppose, is invested in gathering different data sets if we don't have a clear understanding of what we want to get from it.
Great, thank you. Alex, the same question to you, but more at a user level and a project level. How do you use data in your projects to be able to sort of make informed decisions about best solutions to take forward?
First off, just listening to you, Beverly, you're 100% right about data that's collected and collated and it just sits dust, right? So many schemes we now are asked to do COBE data, and you know the advantage of that is preventative maintenance and understanding how your building operates. But most schools don't have these systems in place, right? So when I was at uni many moons ago, I was told that BMS was the world's most expensive time clock, but actually it's not. It has a huge array of data that can be collected, but unless you use that and use that to optimise your building and optimise the systems that you've got in place, you're really not going to see any value out of that. And just as an example, in terms of us informing design, you wouldn't believe how many buildings that we survey, and when we're looking to implement the electrification of heat, and you look at the existing boiler size, and really we only get one data set, which is the incoming utility supply, and how different that is from the peak load that we understand from the incoming utility data to the actual boiler that's installed is often quite vast.
And Alex, sorry, go on.
Yeah, I was just going to pick up, I think, on the interesting thing as well is that skill set about getting that data, and you can get it as PMs or CAs, but actually the people that are going to deliver the projects, you know, you want them to be satisfied with the data that they've got before they develop solutions, but then applying things like measurement and verification plans and appropriately putting money into things like M&V, it might be, you know, people might see £10,000-15,000 for measurement and verification plan as a waste of money, but if it standardises things, it follows a similar pattern across all investments. I do a lot of work with energy performance contracts, and it links to payments. So contractors have to deliver those savings, otherwise they don't get paid the same amount of money. There's retained. So having that ownership, that we gather the right data but put the onus on the right people to gather it and use it and optimise it is quite important as well.
Which look, I mean, measurement and verification is definitely a way of sort of validating and making sure that data is used effectively, but how do you get schools that aren't necessarily trained and skilled in using that sort of methodology? Because you know,
Yeah.
they'll have to pay for a consultant. Not all schools can afford that. So how do you overcome those sorts of challenges? What do you think needs to be done?
And I guess it comes down to how much you see the value in it and how much you're prepared to pay for that, and whether it becomes on like a statistic. You know, if it become part of the procurement mechanism that it's actually worthwhile doing. You're not going to get every school trained up and have a certified measurement and verification professional. It doesn't make sense. But you know, if the procurement routes facilitate that when we do these projects, we develop these plans appropriately and at a scale that is necessary, and that we buy into that, then you're actually getting the right people to do the right analysis. There is an element, obviously, owners operating things effectively in the ownership, but that then comes from the M&V plan, that these are the activities we're going to do. This is what sits with you as your responsibility as an owner, and that's that education piece that Becca was talking about earlier. But then also, what is the responsibility of the contractor, etc., with soft landings, commissioning, seasonal commissioning, etc.
Brilliant, thank you. Bev, one for you around sort of support for end users. So we talked about the data side of it and how that can support end users in managing their technology. We know there's things like gems and tools and resources out there. What else is there really to support schools? Because like I said, we know there's a vast array of schools, very different skill sets across different schools. How can we best support all of them through DFE?
Yeah, so you're right, Ursula. At the moment, there is good estates management guidance for schools available, and there's other sort of, I suppose, fragmented pieces of guidance out there. There's also all of the help, you know, sort of seen from the panel earlier that we're aware of, the net zero hubs, Energy Systems Catapult. They've got lots of public sector decarbonisation guidance out there as well. So there's a lot. Even though we don't, you know, own or provide all of that guidance, there is a lot out there. But the sustainability hub, with the climate ambassadors that the DFE is working on, that will ideally support all of the different pieces of guidance and support that's out there. It will identify where the gaps are. It will hopefully bring all of this support together so that the schools and trusts, etc., have one central place to go and actually get that. And the climate action plans as well should hopefully assist with that. So it's in the making, because we've obviously identified that it's every school is taking a different approach at the moment. There's no one size fits all at the moment, but there's also not a clear route for schools to take. So that is part of our wider strategy as well.
Great, thank you. Anyone else?
I think it's interesting what you said, right? And it comes back to your point, is that there's a massive knowledge gap between all different varieties of schools and educational institutions, and we see this as designers, right? Is that there's lots of well-funded universities that have a huge amount of knowledge, and then the next day we might be talking to like a small primary school or a small secondary school. And actually the disparity in what they understand and then what they're actually able to achieve from that understanding can be quite dramatic.
And I suppose that the situation that we're in, where there's a big skills gap, not everybody is really, up to date with how to manage your building or have a sustainable estate, but we do have an opportunity to sort of intercept them at school level and try to bring the children up like this. And there's loads of STEM materials out there. There's the class of your own, design, engineer, construct modules. There's lots available. So there is a lot that I know that some schools adopt practices like that, but maybe the future that we're going to move to, maybe they all will, and we'll sort of we might not see the benefits, but maybe in the future they won't be sitting here talking about this problem.
And some of the, this previous session before lunch as well, some of the technologies that are out there that are being rolled out, we've done work with the Energy Sparks team, and obviously what was presented earlier is fantastic in terms of those national, the opportunity for remote support, engaging in that data capture and that ease of engagement with that information. It's obvious when it's on a graph, but you go into a plant room and you think, what does this mean? How does it work? So it's just the way that we engage, and looking at standardised approaches, I think, is really important, so that we can then, you can do that peer-to-peer knowledge learning as well.
That's interesting, standardisation, because that's obviously forms part of the topic around MMC. Do you think there's opportunities to bring further standardisation into the decarbonisation sort of arena, particularly with the thoughts around standardising, creating pipelines, and then being able to then use that to invest in skills?
Is that to anyone?
Well, I guess there was a question there somewhere, but what's your views on that? As consultants in particular, are you looking for a greater pipeline coming from your clients to be able to invest in that?
I think we would say so, yes. I think, confidence, we talked about the PSDS, you're going to get the money and the time and the energy that goes into that. But if there was a process that it is going to happen, and that the works that you do in the alignment of studies, audits, etc., they're not just going to sit on a shelf. At some point they will be engaged. That just makes people more... you will spend, focus on it more, you'll get greater confidence that the teams will be, you're doing it less speculatively. I think if there is that confidence, we will probably grow better projects quicker. I know that's difficult because it's a huge pot of money we're talking about there, but I think, Becca, as well, when we do a lot of the new build works, we often then leave a client with an SS6 that says do all of this, but realistically they've not got a plan or money to do it. But if they knew it in due course in 10 years or something, they would engage us more at the SS6 level than they currently do, which is a desktop exercise, to be honest with that.
I agree with all of that completely, and with the sort of project specific the sort of sustainable estates, how are we going to leave the schools, there's probably a future position where that is a more standardised piece, and it's the same for all of the schools, so that that's not being replicated on every single project. Because really, if you take a step back and you think about it, the advice it's the same advice, really. It's just some information that the schools need to know, but just on the sort of standardised and scalable solutions, part of our sort of evidence gathering until 2025. Before actually investing, we do have a couple of different projects sort of tackling this approach from different angles. So we've got the Resilient Schools programme, which is looking at sort of low cost, high impact interventions, more sort of sustainability, holistic focused, and that's looking at to something that could be scaled up. We've also looked at standardised heat decarbonisation as well, as a possible solution. So to answer your question, standardised, scalable solutions, they are possible at different scales. It's just obviously the investment is not confirmed on any of that.
And do you think we'll see something around that area from the DfE going forward at the next SR? Probably can't comment, but the inclination would be nice.
Maybe.
Thank you. My last question, it sort of brings back to your presentation, Becca, around managing the asset. So what we've seen, well, I've certainly seen time and time again, and I think some of the stuff we saw in the last session with data is that buildings are handed over as shiny new buildings. We start to see the energy consumption creep up over time because things aren't maintained or managed, or things are put into hand mode from automation. How do you think we solve that issue? I mean, it feels like there's a whole scale change that's needed to sort of upskill end users. There's obviously the Climate Ambassadors programme, which no doubt is doing some great work. But what else is needed to make sure that we're giving schools a net and not a fish around this topic area?
I mean, I think, as I said earlier, these new builds are vastly different to previous buildings that we've done, and I think therefore the training and how that process works needs to be different to what has been the norm in the past, and we can't just expect the normal, 10 years ago handing over building the same as what we hand over now. And I think that requires a lot of change of how that training is done, and it's not, again, just a thing that is done maybe with one person in a team and kind of signed off as such, but it's more of a collaborative process that involves more people and actually equips them to be able to look after that building better than just handing over them a manual and kind of saying, there you go. So I think it's something that I think we need to learn as we start handing over these new net zero buildings. What are the lessons learned? How are the actual end users experiencing that handover process? What do they think could be improved on, and actually feeding that back in again, which I think we've covered.
Alex, from your perspective?
I think you make an interesting point there about new builds, particularly in this day and age, where we're looking at things like entrofit and passive house, which I'm really passionate about, and they are a different way of thinking about your building. And anecdotally, I've worked on one or two in the past where you go and visit it 6 months later and users are complaining, it's overheating in here. And actually you look under the desk and there's little 3 kilowatt fan heaters plugged in, and they don't actually understand that all the internal heat gains that you've got from people and your computers and your lights and everything is enough to actually heat your buildings under a passive house scheme.
And it goes back to that slide, I think, that Becca showed earlier on our thing about engaging all those right people at the right time to do that knowledge transfer. And then it's the big lesson learned loop back, isn't it? Where did it not work well? What was the lesson learned? And rather than that just going to a post-occupancy evaluation that goes into a post box somewhere, how do we publish that? How do we get those lessons really back into next phases or knowledge sharing sessions? And I know I keep going on about it, but this is great, these sort of forums, but these don't necessarily have the schools in here, you don't have the janitors in here. How are they taking those lessons learned and sharing them peer to peer? Are they being given the time and the money to support that? And actually there maybe is some benefit and a bit more money going into the operational phase from a sort of a capital perspective that supports those forums or those engagements or what have you, rather than it just being, it's done now, tick box, it's cost £1,500 to do a PLE.
I mean, that's funny, right? Because new builds, and we're talking about new builds, implementation of BMS systems, and it's funny how many buildings and schools that you go into that have quite intelligent BMS systems, and actually when you walk into the plant room, all the mechanical plant is on hand, and you know they're actually operating this manually, and the janitor comes in at 6 o'clock in the morning to turn the domestic hot water on, so there's hot water, and actually trying to fundamentally educate people about how they use that building moving forward, so that systems become efficient and we use less energy.
Great, thank you all. So I think what I'm really hearing from the group is we talked a lot about sort of skills and knowledge. It sounds like there's a certain role for consultants and contractors to play in that space, but there's certainly a role in the sort of longer life of that asset through educating janitors or through things like the Climate Ambassadors programme. Bev, you talked about standardisation and scale, and I think that's really important for a lot of us in this room, is that to have a foresight of pipeline actually gives us an investable model. We know there's a skill shortage sort of coming through, and actually when we talk about skills and there's a skill shortage, we're in sort of double trouble in that sense, aren't we? So looking at scalable options is something that we need to be sort of, I say we, you guys really. I've forgotten where I was for a second. We talked about data and actually having useful data on useless data, and making sure we can use that. Again, probably around skills and educating people on that. So it feels like the theme here is sort of skills and scale, is how I would summarise it anyway. But anyway, look, we'll open up to the floor if there's any questions. Dave at the back. Just to be awkward.
Thanks, Herschel. I think my question comes back to that point about handover, and I think someone mentioned sort of keeping some of the capital cash flow back to pay for POE. Do we think there's a role where actually we need to be looking at far more holistic cash flow planning for schools? We're actually building in maintenance costs into revenue spend for schools. They know what to go and buy for a maintenance contract. They're now getting heat pumps where they'd have a boiler before. Supply chain's very different. You can't change a fluorescent light tube if you put it with an LED fitting in the ceiling. So do we think we need to make sure we've got that planning in place so that school bursars and finance teams can actually plan for that long-term maintenance and get the contracts in place to make sure they can look after the kit we put in?
Who wants to take that?
I'll start very briefly. Yes, that sounds great. I suppose it would just be, who would fund that? Where would the funding come from to cover that? Just the way that funding is allocated, you might not necessarily be able to cover all of those services with the capital funding that would, pay for that school. So it's and in different. There's different approaches in different, for example, in Scotland, through some of their programmes. Their funding is allocated differently, so they can embed things like that in a sort of slightly different way. So it is a challenge. I don't have the solution for it on the spot to give you, but yeah, any views from?
I think that whole point about whole life cost modelling full stop is really important, that we are getting that across. I don't think we always do. I think a lot of it is focused on capex and not only sort of the utility cost variance, which is obviously challenging with electricity prices the way they are for heat, etc., but the maintenance as well. How much more does it cost to maintain a heat pump compared to a boiler? Quite a lot. And how we built that in, how have we expressed that? But then is there other, making sure the school is bought into that and understands that early doors, so that, as you're saying, the bursars, etc., can plan in advance. I know that's not overcoming how you do cash models and support programs, etc., but I think it's important that whole life cost models probably become more upfront and centre in the design stage.
Yeah, I mean, if I can just sort of include my thoughts in this question. I mean, I'm a chair of governors at my daughter's school, and it's a fantastic role, but I can, unless that money's ring-fenced for maintenance, it is 100% going to be spent on safeguarding and delivering children's education. So, I mean, the challenge is just as much about trying to understand where to spend your money effectively, but also schools have been unfunded for several years, if we can say this now. I'm not a civil servant. They've been unfunded, they had unfunded pay rises, and it's become a clear challenge for them and a burden to them in managing their assets, which is probably going to contribute, I suspect, to increased condition need across the estate over time.
Hi, I'm Sean Weston. I sit here with 3 hats on. I'm a trustee of a multi-academy trust. I'm an architect that's designed a lot of schools over 20 years, primary, secondary, and I'm currently a DFE TA design advisor. My question is about SS6 document. I've had the privilege of putting one together, or a couple together, and I can see a day where I'm going to receive one when I'm sitting on the mat side, coming to me as a mat. I think you touched on it just. I have a worry that that great document goes and sits in a black file and nothing gets done with it, and none of it can be funded. So the aspiration is fantastic. Do you have any further thoughts on how that might be developed in the future, specifically to the DFE?
Yeah, so that is obviously a risk. We can't control what they do once they have that document. So just for anyone who's not familiar with it, it's essentially a sort of sustainable estates document with project-specific information and then future recommendations that the school receive once the project is completed. And it probably the case is that they'll only go looking for it once once something fails in the building, or there's a need for it. And sort of what I was saying earlier on about a lot of except the sort of maybe project-specific information that you would want to know if you were making any changes at a later point, probably could all be standardised. So, it might be that once we're always sort of trying to improve things, it might be that that's the route that we take, so that all of that standardised information that's going to be very similar to all the different school settings at the time when they need it is maybe available centrally. It could be a better solution. And in terms of that project specific data, everybody spoke about training at the end of the project. They really that probably should be included there. And I mean, it's a digital document. It's not a printed piece of paper unless you want to print it. But like in terms of where all that's saved at the school level, obviously staff move and it might get lost. So there probably is there's something there that's.
I think as a consultant as well doing them, and this is no slight on our contractor colleagues, but I think they often get lost after the design stage and they're not adopted and adapted as much as we would like them to be by the contracting team. They have a lot of weight, and if almost as a CSR perspective, if there's an opportunity for them to pick that up and actually support in the immediacy, if there's a PSDS window open or something like that, that it's not just, that was done by the consultant, it's nice to have in the future, but that's not this project. Well, it actually is. It's quite a fundamental part of that feasibility stage if we can align it, that someone takes ownership of it.
And then to come back to that, I think there's an opportunity for the DFE potentially to link it to future CIF funding and things like that, so that if you do come back, you've got to showcase your SS6 document to us, and I think that there's some joined up thinking there we could possibly look at doing.
Yeah, thanks, and we'll definitely sort of take your commentary away, because you're absolutely right. It's almost all there. All of that relevant information is there, and at a point in time, it does become very useful. So yeah, thank you for your question.
So Alex.
Hi there. Really interesting to hear your thoughts so far. I've got a challenge for you, really. So we heard John Dewsbury this morning talking about the climate risk and the challenges from flooding and overheating that we will get with schools. Thinking about that alongside the efficiencies and the net zero in operations of schools, how can the design work of new builds, how can the work that you guys do, how can that bring about adapted and resilient schools?
Sorry, Alex, is that for who? Anyone? Okay.
You're talking about moving away from mitigation and into adaptation and managing risk.
Okay, I mean, I'll maybe start then. So we obviously at the DFE, and as John's mentioned, we have the commitments that we've made in the National Adaptation Plan about overheating and water scarcity, etc. And like measuring the risks of those, and then thinking about what adaptive measures could be a part of this, and all the sort of side projects that we've mentioned, they are sort of trying to capture that, and any support or guidance that comes out, it absolutely needs to be mindful of those risks that have been identified. For some of them, again, it's like overheating, for example, a lot of sort of standard retrofit measures that most technical professionals are aware of that, but it does all need to sort of come together as one piece and be looked at holistically instead of just this focus being on net zero. It's not even if it comes across as our constant focus, it absolutely isn't, and we do have these much wider commitments that we have to address, and I think like the industry at a point in time, they are going to have to get on board with that and assist.
Just quickly, I mean, we've been privileged to support Scottish Government in the development of their net zero public sector building standard. They need to get better with acronyms, but it's a good programme, and it actually balances that internal environmental quality with energy and net zero outcomes, obviously whole life carbon, but then also climate resilience and all those sorts of things. That it also starts with place and placemaking and place-based thinking, and that we're building the right buildings. We're not just replacing a school because we need to replace a school. We're putting the school in the right place. It has other functions, and I appreciate that transcends the sort of the net zero element. But it is really important that it drives those decisions, and you have those as a core framework at the start, and you continue to refer back to those as you develop the net zero outcomes. So you're not sort of got the regret issues. But I think that is happening in the industry. I think a lot more. Architects particularly drive that, and that sort of that REBA zero concept stuff is really important, and then we kind of feed off that into the engineering field, etc.
And I think I want to sort of bring it back to my very, very early point, which is what is the function of a school building? It's to deliver education. If a school's not open, I think COVID showed that if a school's not open, kids are at home, which means they're not learning. So the importance of mitigating schools closing down because of climate risk is a really fundamental part of the UK's ability to function and create great learners.
Hi, I've got my question now. I'm Radia from Atkins Realis. I'm an architect. I'm also a TA for the school rebuilding programme. So today we've spoken a lot about what happens at the end of the whole thing. My question is now looking at a challenge at the start. So start with an anecdote. I went through an entire project, and at the end, during 12 months defects, we had to go back to a school within 6 months and replace all the filters for MVHR units. And we were wondering what's gone wrong, went to the BMS system, spoke to the maintenance team, did all of that. Found out it was actually because the pedagogical style had changed. Teachers had an open door policy, so the whole system failed. Now, the reason I've mentioned that anecdote is not to say I'm a bad architect, because there's a challenge at the start, which is I feel strongly that if there was an investment in time in the beginning, we actually involved teachers a lot more. They weren't just an appointment in a chem meeting, came in for 15 minutes, told us a little bit more about their teaching style. They left, the next one comes in, and they come with a wish list of like 25 things that they would love to have. And I think that a lot of these challenges that we face at the end could probably have been addressed at the start. And a lot of the challenges that Matsu, you explained, again, a site on a contractor, they're in a rush to try and build it. They've got probably a 2-year program, try and finish it, try and get through it, do the coordination. We get wrapped up in it as well, trying to meet those deadlines. A lot of the challenges we then face during that period could have probably been resolved at the start. We have a lot of premises team management as well that they're quite worried at the start when they say, what sort of system are you going to put in place? I need to know how to use it. They panic about it, but they let it slide because they know they're not going to get the opportunity during that. So my question to the DFE is there an incentive here to probably invest a bit more time, especially when we look at the school rebuilding programme? We're under such tight measures there to try and do as much as we can, which we do. But if we spent a bit more time, maybe have a 2-stage tender process, bring in our contractor friends on board, would that help resolve some of these challenges we're now seeing?
Thanks, Radia. Good question. So in terms of that sort of upfront involvement with the school, we had a similar question this morning that Crawford had answered, and it's great to get the schools involved, and it's really important to take them on the journey. But in terms of how much sway that has on the building design and how much that would move us away from what we've actually set out within our employers' requirements of what we want, for, like delivering at pace and at scale and trying to get that quality as well. Probably we wouldn't want it to move away too much from that, and what we have found is that the needs of the schools, they're not hugely different. So I completely agree, bringing them on the journey, and in SRP, when schools are selected, there's lots of engagement sessions that happen early on, and all the schools and the trusts, etc., that are going through the process, they are brought on the journey, and they're given the opportunity to discuss with different sort of people from the DFE, and learn about almost like to show them what to expect and how that's going to go. So there is a level of engagement there, and probably more, maybe that's focused quite a lot on the end user. Maybe that needs to, maybe the DFE needs to broaden that and branch out and bring along some of the teams that will actually be working on them. Maybe that's how that comes together. But there's definitely, there's always room for improvement, really. So, sorry, that doesn't really answer your question, because I'm not going to announce like a change that we're going to make. So apologies, but thank you, and we'll take it on board. I don't know if anyone has any views on that they want to chip in and make it maybe worse for me.
You guys do BPEs and POEs annually, I think it is. Is there anything lessons you take from that and feed back into your standards and specs? And
yes, so we are we're always doing that, we're always we've got a large POE program. We're sort of going through our findings, and from the BPEs as well. And I suppose going back to that comment about not just gathering data for the sake of gathering data, we are always looking at that data to try and improve what we're asking for. And it may be changes to technical requirements, it may be changes to the timings of things, or the length of certain parts of the process. So yeah, there's always room for improvement.
Thanks, Beth. Is there any other questions? Sorry, guy in the back. And you. I think we've got time for one more, sorry. That's okay. I think we've got time for one more now. That's okay.
Hi, I'm Jared Hosper from Desco, M&E Consultants, Sustainability Consultants. I'm on both sides of the fence in the DFE schemes as well, TA, and also doing design for contractors, etc. Now, one thing that comes up all the time is you mentioned earlier, is running costs of schools. Obviously, they've got refined budgets for electricity bills. And obviously, electricity is circa 3 times the cost of gas. And obviously, with the DFE annexes, everyone's kind of encouraged on the energy hierarchy to look at to look at heat pumps rather than gas boilers. And new build schools, they're all, everyone's kind of afraid to put gas in. It's always heat pumps. But heat pumps, in winter, obviously, are going to cost more to run. Is that being considered in terms of maybe a hybrid approach rather than just heat pumps, in terms of optimising running costs versus carbon?
I mean, yeah. So we set that, we set those requirements within the technical annexes, and that's what the projects are designed to instruct and constructed to. And when the projects are being developed, if recommendations like that come forward and the evidence is there to take that hybrid approach, we would absolutely consider it. We have the sort of hierarchy in place so that we could move away from gas boilers. But if there is a sort of cost optimum evidence-based strategy that comes through, then yeah, we're not against that. And
I think from a truest sort of energy background, though, I guess if we've got new builds, the ideal there obviously is that they can be built to the heat pump specs, and we have enough challenges doing the retrofit and maybe bivalent systems and hybrid systems. Definitely there's an opportunity there, but I think from the new build side, sort of trying to drive that, they're the opportune moments where we can go all electric and get the right solutions and stuff like that, and learn the lessons.
So with a all electric solution, you really do need to think about a fabric first approach, right? But just to come back to your question, particularly working with Salix, right? So between Salix phases 3 and 4 and 5, the requirements of that have changed, and they have actually started to look and accept hybrid systems, and not necessarily in the bivalent way of topping up heat from 55 to 80 degrees, but actually just switching it off, you know, so actually sizing your boilers for peak load during winter, and then actually optimising your air source heat pump so they only run when the outside air temperatures, like say above 5 degrees, when you're actually going to get the COPs that make them more efficient than boilers.
And that will get us a lot more scale, a lot quicker in terms of heat pump rollout, and that's certainly something we looked at a few years ago when states didn't allow it, unfortunately, in terms of getting maximum and optimising. Otherwise, you're sizing heat pump kit at max peak demand, and you've got N+1 resilience and all that sort of stuff. There's a lot of capex that goes in for actually limited saving and actually worst case performance in some instances. So definitely on the retrofit, something to look at, but I guess from the new build, it's a no-no in some ways.
Thank you. We're at time. We're slightly over, only a minute or two, but I'm sure the coffees will still be warm. But round of applause for our panel. Thank you.